Dear friends, welcome to this session of Illuminating and Strengthening the Work of Baha'i Writers. This session is titled Writing for Junior Youth and Youth, and it is my great honor to introduce these two writers, Susan Engel and Amy Renshaw. After finishing high school in Michigan in 1968, Susan Engel returned to her childhood home, Granville, Ohio, and earned a BFA in theater arts from Denison University in 1972. After her twin daughters were born in 1973, Susan began writing songs and poems for children, publishing more than 70 over the years, including the award-winning Come and Sing CD. Susan joined the staff of Brilliant Star Children's Magazine in 1995 as an editor and writer. In 2016, Susan created her first tiny book, The Baha'i Faith, A Tiny Introduction, followed by The Tiny Book of Prayers, a Spanish version of the Tiny Introduction, and A Soul is Forever, a tiny book of comfort. She is retired from her editorial work for Brilliant Star, but continues to write, including 3 books for the Changemaker series for Bellwood Press, an imprint of children's literature of the Baha'i Publishing Trust in the United States. These biographies are created especially for an upper elementary middle school audience. Much of her poetry is accessible at her website, iambicnana.com. Amy Renshaw is the senior editor of Brilliant Star Magazine and Brilliant Star Online, which are publications of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States. She guides the editorial team in developing creative concepts and content and coaches freelancers, contributors, and kid bloggers. Amy is the author of Voyage of Love, Abdu'l-Baha in North America, which is a book of historical nonfiction for junior youth and youth. She also wrote the historical mystery novel Strong Suspicions, a Sophie Strong mystery. A fan of sleuthing since discovering Nancy Drew books as a kid, Amy loves exploring fascinating facts related to kids' interests and challenges. When not reading or writing, she enjoys hiking, doing jigsaw puzzles, and watching historical TV shows. She has a BA in English and Sociology from the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. So just real quick, what we'll do is these two writers, outstanding writers, will have their presentation, and then at the end, we'll have some Q&A. So dear friends, please help me welcome Susan Engel and Amy Renshaw.
Thank you so much, Chris. And thank you everyone for coming to our little session. We're so excited to talk with you today. This is going to be sort of casual. We have some slides, but Susan and I will kind of be going back and forth and speaking kind of naturally. You might have noticed some overlap in our introductions. We worked together at Brilliant Star for 16 years. So we are like family to each other. So if you see us laughing or teasing each other, that's why. So as I said, it'll be kind of casual. I do have a couple of questions for everyone. I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind putting answers in the chat. I'm wondering what kind of audience you're looking to write for, or you do write for. Do you write for youth or junior youth? Do you write fiction or nonfiction or poetry or all of the above? So that way, if you can give us some feedback when you get a chance, that will give us an idea of who we're speaking with. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the spiritual nature and needs of junior youth and youth. And I'll share our little PowerPoint here. So Susan will start with talking about the spiritual needs. Then I'll talk a little bit about publishing for junior youth and youth, what kids look for in books. We'll both talk about that, as well as what makes a book engaging and our tips on how to get started or keep going. And those are just our opinions. There's no one right way to do it. So keep exploring if you don't hear any good advice here. And then we'll put aside about a half hour for Q&A. And then if we don't have that much Q&A, we can keep talking. So these were my questions. What kind of writing you do? What ages are you writing for? What would you like to get out of this webinar? That would maybe help us steer us in the right direction. These are Susan's lovely books. I love love your I love all your work, Susan. This is what I was up to. And Susan is going to talk a little bit about the spiritual power of youth.
Oh, you went by your book so quickly, Amy. Well, for those of you who are Baha'is and have studied Book 5, you've run into some pretty powerful quotations about how wonderful this age group is. I'll just read these out loud so we can hear them as well as see them. The period of youth is characterized by strength and vigor and stands out as the choicest time in human life. Abdu'l-Baha eagerly anticipates that each one of you may become as a fearless lion moving in the pastures of human perfection. And the House of Justice writes, to every generation of young believers comes an opportunity to make a contribution to the fortunes of humanity, unique to their time of life. For the present generation, the moment has come to reflect, to commit, to steel themselves for a life of service from which blessing will flow in abundance. So these are the people that we're privileged to write for, and it really helps me to think about these souls as I go about the work I do. And one of the things that we can do to encourage kids, of course, is the course itself when they're going through the Ruhi Institute helps kids express themselves, and they also learn how to be discerning about media, because media is such a powerful influence at this time in the world. One of the things that we can do is to help kids explore creating media themselves. And we're going to show you a little MP4 of an animation of Create in Me a Pure Heart. And I'll read part of the poem. Don't be distressed if it's not the whole thing, for those of you who have memorized it. But this was created by a youth for our local 9-year plan conference.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay.
Create in me a pure heart, O my God, and renew a tranquil conscience within me, O my hope. Through the spirit of power confirm thou me in thy cause, and by the light of thy glory reveal unto me thy path. Through the power of thy transcendent might lift me up unto the heaven of thy holiness, and by the breezes of thine eternity gladden me. Let thine everlasting melodies breathe tranquility on me, and let the riches of thine ancient countenance deliver me from all except thee. And let the tidings of the revelation of thine incorruptible essence bring me joy. O thou, who art the most manifest of the manifest, and the most hidden of the hidden.
Lovely. Oops, there we go again. So you were still, you had more to say about youth, right, Susan?
Well, is this little tale about Shoghi Effendi that I could read. Because, it's not easy to take on this mantle. And having this example, Hand of the Cause of God, Leroy Ayerwas told a story. He gave this example of the guardian. I didn't want to be the guardian. I knew what it meant. I knew that my life as a human being was over. I didn't want it, and I didn't want to face it. So as you remember, I left. Remember, I left the Holy Land and went up in the mountains of Switzerland, and I fought with myself until I conquered myself. Then I came back and I turned myself over to God, and I was the guardian. Now, he said, every Baha'i in the world, every person in the world has to do the exact same thing. Whether you're a Hand of the Cause, or whether you're a Knight of Baha'u'llah, or whether you're a member of a National Assembly, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a pioneer, whether you're an administrator, or whatever you are in the cause. Every Baha'i must fight with himself and conquer himself. And when he's conquered himself, then he becomes a true instrument for the service of the cause of God, and not until then. And he won't achieve his great success until he has done it. And this is what every Baha'i in the world should know. So I think in the work for Brilliant Star and for these biographies that are really targeted at the junior youth, Baha'i junior youth, and the world, not just Baha'is, that this is a pretty powerful statement by the Guardian that we can all look to, no matter what we're writers or just plain old Baha'is like me.
Definitely. Thank you, Susan. I'll skip ahead here. So I was going to talk a little bit about our audience of junior youth and youth, and it looks like people are writing for, I guess, both junior youth and youth, it looks like. So obviously, though, maybe not obviously, those are terms that are used in the Baha'i faith, junior youth and youth, and they're not used in publishing. So if you're going out and considering, publishing with, in the secular world, I guess you'd call it, you would more likely hear terms like middle grade books and YA books. And it's interesting because young adult books are for readers who are not yet adults. They are roughly 12 to 18, and middle grade books are for readers 8 to 12. And these are some guidelines that are used in the publishing field, but and as far as whether the publishers of Baha'i materials use them, I think so, but they'll have more to say about that tomorrow when they have their panel discussion. So one good thing to remember is that kids like to read up. So not if a kid is reading about it, another kid who's 8 years old, that kid is probably 5 or 6. So the protagonists of middle grade books or books for junior youth might be 8 to 12 or 14. And the protagonists of youth books or young adult books would be more like 15 to 18 or 20, something like that. So kids like to look up to kids who are older than them when they're reading. And then there are some length conventions that are common, definitely not set in stone, but the middle grade books are usually a little shorter than the YA or youth books. And if you're new to writing, we count those words one by one because pages can differ so widely. So if you're talking to publishers or listening to podcasts about publishing, you'll see these thousands of words tossed around. And like a regular adult novel that you might read could be like 80 to 100,000 words. And then, we can get to know these kids. I mean, we all remember when we were kids this age. That was a long time ago for a lot of us. It's really fascinating to hear what kids are into today or to talk to them about what their interests are. I would say if you're writing in any kind of audience, to write for kids, even if you're writing for Baha'i publishers, write for kids of all faiths, because there's no way to know, what a Baha'i kid knows, or, what a new Baha'i might know about the faith. So like, for example, when we're writing in Brilliant Star, we never assume that our audience is all Baha'is. We try to explain those terms that, Baha'i, someone who's new to the faith, a friend of the faith might not understand, like local spiritual assembly or hand of the cause or these kinds of terms. I also find it's helpful to read what kids are reading. And it's delightful also, I might say. We did our own little survey of just a few friends' kids that we know, and they read a lot of fantasy and kind of magical books, but kids who like to read have a really voracious appetite, I found, and they just read a wide variety of things. So it's fun, I think, to go to the youth section of the library or the bookstore and just see the amazing creativity out there. I just read one called A House on the Cerulean Sea. That was fascinating. And even these fantasy books, if you're maybe not into fantasy or science fiction, they still have the same core. Everybody wants that compelling storyline, those characters you can relate to. I mean, whether they are from another planet or living next door, you want that character that you can relate to. And another thing that I recommend, I guess, or that I try to do, is to challenge my negative opinions about youth culture. Of course, when we do the Baha'i, like book 5 or book 3, we talk about the wonderful potential of youth and junior youth to be of service to the world. And a lot of times with other adults, or even with ourselves, we might think, oh, but they're always doing video games, they're always on their phones. They're just watching YouTube, they're just reading comic books. And all of those things are true, but yet there is something good in all of those things too. I mean, there's a lot of positive things that they're doing on their phones. They might be learning other languages, even video games they're playing can have amazing world building, I found. And learn a lot of things. So there's just a wide variety. There are two sides to every story. So if when I'm tempted to just roll my eyes at what the kids are up to these days, I try to remember that there's a wide variety of content out there in books and online. So another thing we explored a little bit is what kids want in books. It's not that much different from what we all want, but this was a little survey that was done of kids ages 6 to 17. And these are kids in the UK who are probably not much different from kids throughout the Western world. 63% want to laugh and 46% want to use their imagination. And Susan and I had a little trouble with that one because any book makes you use your imagination. So that's a little hard to pin down what they exactly meant by that. But, a third of them want to learn something new, or they want to have a mystery or a problem to solve. And they want characters that they wish they could be like because they're strong and smart and brave. All readers, whether they're adults or kids, they want to get hooked into that story from the beginning. And kids, I guess a lot of kids, they say like stories that are fast paced and they might lose interest with a slow moving plot. They might like books that focus on, relationships with school and family and friends. And they want a balance between humor and drama. And again, I think those things are sort of universal. I mentioned the little non-scientific survey that we did. This was really interesting to me to hear from like my friends' kids. And these are like a 13-year-old said, I look for books that have strong female characters and diversity and characters I can connect with. And a 12-year-old said, I like stories that are inspirational and have a sentimental backstory. An 11-year-old said, it feels like it takes you on an adventure or has clues so the reader can solve the mystery themselves. And then they do talk about fantasy and world building. And, there's so many ways that our authors encourage us to use our imaginations when we're reading their stories. So then these are just a few points that came to our minds when we were thinking about what makes a story engaging. And I think the number one thing, and this if you're writing, if you write for anyone, is that conflict, tension, excitement, that kind of suspense is essential really to any story. And conflict doesn't mean it has to be two people are fighting or arguing or getting angry. It can be that internal tension, and it can be really subtle too. I was just looking through Voyage of Love today, and I was reading this part that I wrote about Juliet Thompson, who is one of my big favorites. And in the chapter about her, it says, on a snowy February night, about 2 months before Abdu'l-Baha's visit to the West, Juliet Thompson had visited the Bowery Mission. It was in a poor, neglected part of New York City, and she went there against her mother's wishes. Though she was about 39 years old, it was the first time she had ever been dishonest with her mother. The Bowery was a shelter for homeless men who had nowhere to go. They often slept in doorways or on park benches. And, there's just that little hint of tension there. She lied to her mother. Is she going to tell the truth to her mom? What is she doing at this homeless shelter? What's going to happen? It's subtle, but, any kind of question that your writing brings up in the mind of the reader is enough to keep them engaged. It can also be a character like wanting one thing but doing another, that tension inside yourself. Another important point when writing for kids is to be age appropriate, but don't preach. And that's kind of a fine line because, of course, we want our works to kind of give a lesson, tell a lesson, or make a statement about something. But it really turns kids off when we kind of get preachy or have a "you should do this" message, or even, when we write like we have all the answers, I guess, the really great stories. I was just watching today this video on YouTube called "What is a Didactic Story?" It was really good. I would look for it. I recommend you look for it. And it talked about how the great stories don't have easy answers. And, readers, they pick up on the message that you're trying to get across. If you tell a story about someone who lied and then they, ended up telling the truth, we don't have to go that extra step and say, Amy was so disappointed in herself that she had told a lie. She knew it was better to be honest. They pick that up, even if you don't say it. One of my favorite resources is a book called, it's called something about kidlit. Oh, Writing Irresistible Kidlit. And this author, Mary Cole, says, kids go to school, church, tutoring, camp to hear adults tell them what to do. They get it from teachers, siblings, parents. The last thing they want to do is pick up a book that has a heavy-handed lesson to impart. But of course your lesson is there, but it can be subtle. Another thing is to start with that hook at the beginning. We're always looking for that in Brilliant Star. And, when you're reading a book, you're looking for that thing that's going to hook you in, the action. A lot of times they say to start your book kind of in the middle of the action. And you save that backstory, where they were born and how they got to that point. That can come later if you hook them in the beginning with something exciting. And another point that you've probably heard a million times if you have done any writing is show, don't tell. And, this is it's a little, I don't know, controversial, but confusing even because, of course, we're telling. We have to tell things. It's writing. And I think I've come to think that the key to that is to not tell about characters' emotions or not tell about their personality. Those are the things you can show. Of course, you have to tell, Harry opened the door. But for example, with Harry Potter, we don't have to say Harry was brave. We can just tell a story, show him being brave. Just another quick example. Speaking of heavy-handed, I was reading about Fred Mortensen, who was the Baha'i who kind of rode the rails, caught an illegal ride on a train in order to visit Abdu'l-Baha at Greenacre. Abdu'l-Baha did not chide him at all. He seemed to be delighted with his story of how he got there. But for example, so when Fred got there, he was filthy from riding the rails. The next morning he had cleaned up. And when Abdu'l-Baha came into the room, he paid little attention to Fred. And Fred, so what I said, and I would do it differently this time, I said, Fred felt unhappy and thought to himself glumly, it must be that he knows I stole a ride. And if I was writing that now, I might just leave out the, he felt unhappy, because that's obvious. It comes across in the writing. But shortly after Abdu'l-Baha left the room, one of his companions returned and said, Abdu'l-Baha wishes to see Mr. Mortensen. And then instead of saying Fred was so excited, I just put in this quote by Fred where he said, why I nearly wilted. I wasn't ready. I hadn't expected to be called until the very last thing. I had to go, and it was with a strange feeling in my heart and wondering what would happen next. So those are just a few little examples of showing and not telling. And Susan has some examples to share about some of the other points.
Just a second, Amy, what was that book title? There was a question somebody wanted to know. Please repeat the book title on writing for children that you referred to.
Sure, this one is, and I have a list at the end also. This is called Writing Irresistible Kidlit.
Awesome, thanks.
Sorry for the Mary Cole. No, that's fine.
Okay. Next, we get to talk about agency. And the kids should solve problems for themselves and figure things out, get in and out of trouble. Kids don't want to read about a kid who listens to their parents or teachers all the time or gets rescued by an adult. There can be adult helpers so long as they show respect for the kids and their abilities, like Professor Dumbledore to Harry Potter or Glinda the Good Witch in The Wizard of Oz. I thought I'd read just a little bit of Hazel Scott's experience as she was getting ready to audition for an award from a radio station in New York City. So I'll just read a paragraph about what happened to her. In addition to being a superb pianist, Hazel had become quite an accomplished singer, ever since she had surprised her mother by singing at the Apollo Theater when she was 11 years old. One of her favorite friends, Ken Harrison, found out about an audition for a radio station called WOR, the Voice of New York. Nervous and concerned for her, Ken began to tell her what to do and what to say at the audition. When Hazel had heard enough, she said to him, "Ken, kindly do not tell me how to conduct business. We will go to the audition and I will play and sing, as I have been doing for 11 years. When the audition was over, she had beaten out hundreds of competitors, and she'd won a 6-month contract with WOR. Additionally, at the age of 15, she had also been given the freedom to choose the music she would perform." So, of course, that was Hazel's story, and I just got to write it down, but she certainly took agency for herself all the time. She was not timid or, swayed too quickly by the opinions of others. Another thing that really hooks kids, and we mentioned this in one of the surveys that Amy read from, is humor. And it's a little hard to get humor into the biographies I'm writing on unless the people themselves exhibit humor. But in some of the poetry I get to write, humor can come out a little more directly. This is a poem called Hooray for Skin. Rejoice and celebrate the skin that keeps the veins and muscles in, that keeps the cold and germs out. That is what skin is all about. Suppose when God created skin, he turned the skin side outside in, so when you talk to Mrs. Jones, your eyes meet over fat and bones and tissues, blue and white and red, that stretch from toe to hand to head. It makes me glad to have a skin to keep the outside, bone side in. Now there are folks who would be mad if our insides were all they had to tell all kinds of folks apart. Maybe they'd learn to read the heart instead of judging from a hue, if that one's false or that one's true. Let's all join hands and feast our eyes on skins of every shape and size, of every tone of gold or white, of luscious black, of dark or light, of every shade that folks come in. Rejoice and celebrate the skin. So another really important thing to do is address the real problems that children have. You know, we come from families where we hope that things are pretty ideal for children, but children have a lot of pain in their lives, as we all do, at one time or another, whether it comes from our families or from other families or from families of friends or even people they're just meeting. So it's really important to tell tales that will resonate with kids and make them feel they're not alone in the world. Oh, I'm the only one whose great uncle uses his belt to whip me. I mean, that's a pretty extreme example, but things like that do happen. And kids need to know that they can survive and that they can conquer. I'm just going to read a little part of a manuscript that's coming up for Robert Hayden, who was what we now call the Poet Laureate of the United States in the 1970s. He had a pretty tough beginning, as do most of the people that are in these biographies. But I thought I'd read a little bit of his story so you could see how important it is to include the difficult parts and to do it in a way that won't hurt kids' hearts or, make them want to stop reading. This is a story of a boy who loved words. He loved how words could make pictures in his mind. He loved how words could explain things clearly and mean more than one thing, both at the same time. Some of the first words a baby learns are the words of his or her name. This baby was named Asa Bundy Sheffy. Asa Sheffy was his birth father's name. Bundy belonged to the doctor who delivered him. Odd that the doctor's name was chosen at all because the baby's eyes were damaged at birth. Odder still, the boy didn't find out about this name until he was a grown man. As far back as he could remember, he had been called Robert Earl Hayden. Robert's mother, Gladys Finn, had more than one name too. She must have not liked it for some reason, because she changed her name to Ruth when she ran away from home to join a circus as a teenager. She was quite beautiful, and she knew that she wanted to be a performer. When she married Robert's father, a coal miner from West Virginia, her name became Ruth Sheffy. They weren't married for long. By the time Ruth gave birth to Asa on August 4th, 1913, in Detroit, Michigan, she and the baby's father were divorced. Perhaps being on her own, she discovered that becoming a mother was nothing like the life on the stage that she pictured for herself. She turned to friends of hers, William and Sue Ellen Hayden, for help. They agreed to take care of the baby while Ruth moved to Buffalo, New York, to find work that she loved, work that would help her support her child. Though Ruth came back to visit and even lived with the Hayden family for a time when the baby grew to be a teenager, the couple raised Robert as their own. For most of his life, Robert thought he'd been adopted by the Haydens, but money was tight and adoption was expensive. The arrangement Ruth had with the Haydens was not legalized, and she thought of Ma and Pa Hayden as foster parents to her child. The Haydens loved him and kept him clothed and fed to the best of their ability. They also didn't understand him very well. William Hayden was a hard-working laborer. He and his wife were uneducated and poor, and they were living with a son who was gifted in reading and had an active imagination. Why didn't he want to play sports with the other children his age? Why would he rather play with a paper theater and make up speeches for the characters he could see in his head? Once, when Robert was absorbed in this play, Pa Hayden took the toy theater from him and ripped it into shreds before his eyes. It could be a very sad household for a little boy.
Thanks, Susan. Those are great examples, and I can't wait to read your new book. Another thing that we didn't talk about too much, but is to give a message of hope. And I know all of your books do that. Even when we address these difficult issues, whether it's personal issues or even things in the world like climate change, we want to end with a message of hope because these are kids. They need to keep the world turning. And then we thought we would share just a few things that we have learned or continue to learn about how to get started with a writing project and how to keep going. And one of Susan's specialties is getting in touch with your inner child. Do you want to talk about that a little, Susan?
Well, I guess so. I remember when I was a kid, and I didn't remember this until much later in my life. I used to, I read a lot of books from the library. Try to escape some of my life, which not all life is pleasant when you're growing up. And so I would read a lot, and I found myself reading biographies. There were little orange covered biographies in our library, and there was quite a lot of them. I think I must have read every one. And I became enamored of learning about those role models. There were people like George Washington Carver and Harriet Tubman. George Washington, heroes in the United States anyway. So that when someone actually mentioned writing biography later in my life, I could open my heart to it because I knew I really loved those stories when I was a kid. Unfortunately, they made up all the dialogue, or maybe fortunately.
Perhaps.
Perhaps. So I try to be a little careful about that, not make up things that aren't there. But anyway, I was pretty passionate about biography, and I think that's why it drew me. I was also passionate about Dr. Seuss, so you can tell from that poem was an early influence of my life. So most of my poetry is pretty Seussian. So in getting in touch with my inner child, I got to go back to all those things that I loved when I was little. And it really helps give life to your writing if that's something you love.
I think that's true. That's true. Yeah, your poetry and your sense of rhythm and melody is a wonderful gift.
You're so sweet. Oh my God.
Yeah, getting in touch with your inner child. Sometimes at Brilliant Star, we talk about, put on your hat, like remember when you were 10 or 12 and just try to think back, what were you concerned about? What were you interested in? How did you spend your time? What did you want to be when you grew up? And just kind of digging into some of those memories or, what made you scared? What were you worried about? All of those things are ways that we can get in touch with our audience. And writing about what you're really passionate about, I think is essential. I mean, it's really difficult to write about something you think you should write about. I have tried it and it peters out after a while. And if you're going to keep going through a whole manuscript, and it can take a lot of perseverance, it has to be something that you really enjoy. And probably you'll hate it by the time you get to the end. I know I do. But at least, for most of the process, it's something that you're passionate about that really makes you excited. And of course, all art comes from God. Do you want to talk about that, Susan?
I do, and I had a whole thing on here about that, but I can't find it. But anyway, there's so many quotes about the arts and sciences coming from the next world via people who are in the next world. And I really try to connect with that when I get started writing. And for the biographies, I try to also, and this is kind of weird, I try to connect with the spirits of the people I'm writing about. And I do feel like I get a sort of understanding of their life a little better if I ask. Please, Dizzy Gillespie, let me see what it was like to be you, a little bit, So I really feel that prayer is an essential part of connecting with writing, because the writing, our souls are manifestations of the Spirit of God. And writing is simply a way of expressing that spirit, as far as I can tell, anyway. So finding the source to begin with, it really helps me. Even if it's not about the faith, it still helps to find that spirit and hold on.
Definitely true. That quote that you love, is that the one about how that the souls with the utmost purity and sanctity, the light which they radiate, is responsible for the progress of the world and the advancement of its peoples? Is that what you were thinking of?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, you told me that, so that's why I wrote it down.
Okay.
They are like unto the leaven which leaveneth the world of being, and constitute the animating force through which the arts and wonders of the world are made manifest. It's pretty incredible to think about. So yeah, like you said, all art comes from God. All art is worship. I said that and wrote that about 1,000 times in Brilliant Star and other places. And then I was still like torn with myself, like, should I write a novel that's not about the faith, or should I write a book that is about the faith? Is it okay? And my friend Amy just looked at me one day and she's like, all of those quotes about how art is worship, and you are still asking yourself this question, you can write about whatever you want. And that's when I wrote my historical mystery novel. Like, I gave myself permission, I guess.
Yay.
And yay! And I have the audacity to call it a series, even though it is only one so far. But hopefully will be more. Even if you're not writing about the faith, I think, your beliefs and your values do come through in your writing. And that can maybe be enough to convey, what you want to say about the faith. Of course, writing about the faith is wonderful. So many people do a marvelous job of it, and that's awesome. But I just wanted to throw out there that, a Baha'i who's writing about something, their beliefs in the faith will come through. And as far as all art coming from God, also, that's not just something that's in the Baha'i faith. If you've read the book, The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, she talks a lot about how, it's that divine inspiration. Inspiration comes from God. And the idea of free writing as a way to get started or keep going is another thing that Julia Cameron talks about in that book. And a lot of other writers do too. One thing that Julia Cameron recommends is doing what she calls morning pages, although you could do them in the evening, where you just write without censoring yourself and just write, I am writing now and I don't have anything to write about, and, or the sun is out today, and, anything to just get yourself going. And sometimes you will surprise yourself with what you have to say, that it's hard to know, before you sit down what it is that you have to say. But once you get going, you might surprise yourself. One of my heroes of writing says to trust emergence. She calls herself a discovery writer. This is Joanna Penn. I listen to her podcast called The Creative Pen. And she talks about being a discovery writer. Some people call it being a pantser, because you're flying by the seat of your pants instead of working from an outline. And you discover things as you go along. I think that's the most fun thing about writing, is when I'm, just typing along and all of a sudden I go, oh, that would be a good idea, I think to myself. Whether it is or not, I don't know. But it's fun to just surprise yourself. And I think it's important, along with, writing what you're passionate about, is writing what you like to read, because, that enthusiasm really does come through. Some writers say, look for your why. Why do you want to write? Why does this person that you're writing a biography about inspire you? Why does your topic grab your interest? And those are some things that, you can convey then to the reader, what it is that really drives you. I think it's really important, I believe, to write all the way through your first draft without editing. It's so hard to put aside that editing hat, I guess, or that editing brain. And a lot of times when I'm reading a draft that I'm writing, I'm thinking of what someone else has written and published and how it's so much better. One of my favorite writers, and I think Susan likes her too, Anne Lamott, who wrote the book Bird by Bird, which is sort of a Bible for writers sometimes. She said everybody writes terrible first drafts. And I know that to be true. And I also tell all the writers I work with, don't criticize yourself at this point. When you get it out on the page, then you can put on that editing hat. But just get through to the end. That's something I've only recently started doing, is going through to the end and persevering. There are many other novels I wrote that just, I just lost interest in, and they're half done in the on the shelf or in the drawer. And hearing the stories of other writers really helped me keep going and persevere. There's even a book I read called A Writer's Guide to Persistence. I thought that was pretty interesting. This was helpful to me. And another thing that was helpful is, like I mentioned, Joanna Penn's podcast, The Creative Pen, and she talks a lot about her experience, and she always says, self-doubt is part of the process. Just expect yourself to, at some point, go, oh, this is terrible. I should give up on this. No one's going to want to read this. It sounds so blank, stupid, or whatever. I actually had a little sign on my computer through the whole first draft of my latest novel that said, it's okay to suck. It's only the first draft. And I told myself that like every day. And, just have, I guess have a little faith in yourself, just keep going. And definitely get some feedback at some point. Susan and I both feel strongly about that. Do you want to talk about feedback and review?
I'd love to. In writing about people, Amy's lucky she can make up stuff.
So lucky.
She can follow her inner muse, and when she gets ideas about dialogue or, what's she going to do next, then she can just make it happen. With biography, you can't do stuff that isn't part of the story. You have to make sure you get the facts right. And part of that is making sure you get the culture right, or as right as you can. I'm a little old white lady, and I've been writing about these amazing African-American people. And so I have to be really careful to check. I have a good friend who shall remain anonymous because she chooses to, but who's African-American and reads the first draft for me and lets me know if I've let anything sneak in that's, racism that just kind of pops out because of the way I was raised. So she really helps me with that, my language, and if the story, for some reason, leads people to think that there's a stereotype at work, then I have to work really hard to make sure that doesn't happen. I also have children who both help me so much in that first editing process. When you're writing along, you think, oh, this makes sense. This connects perfectly. This transition is wonderful. And sometimes they'll go, Mom, I don't know what you're talking about here. And it's wonderful. I go, oh, yeah. Because I'm writing it, I don't see as clearly as you do, who's just coming to see it with fresh eyes. I think you have more to say about that, don't you, Amy? Because Amy works with a writers group. I'm kind of the Lone Ranger over here.
Some people like writers groups and some people don't. I think I've had really good luck with nice people in my writing groups. But I'm a firm believer in find a writing group, and if you don't click with it, try to find another one. But the writing groups that I work with, it's really helpful just to get somebody else's eyes on those chapters. And they tell you, what they don't understand, just like your daughters do, Susan. This doesn't work for me, or this doesn't sound like something they would say in 1912, or just this is confusing the way you had this person walk across the room. It sounds odd. I don't get it. One of the things that Mary Cole says is finding a good critique fit can be tough. It can take a while to find a partner or a group. So don't get frustrated or quit searching after a few failed matches. Avoid those critique partners who think everything you write is perfect. I've never had one of those. And also, I would avoid like the plague, any critique group that makes you feel bad about yourself or makes you feel like you're not doing anything right. They can be, I think that's the horror story that a lot of people hear or even experience is when a group is too critical or meanly critical or not tactfully giving you constructive criticism. Yeah, that can be soul crushing. So I would definitely stay away from that. Another book I like, I'll mention this one. This is by Cheryl Klein, and she did some editing for She Who Shall Not Be Named, J.K. Rowling. And her book is called The Magic Words, Writing Great Books for Children and Young Adults. I love this one. And she says, find congenial sources of feedback. Look for people who understand what you're trying to do and who can tell you where you succeed and where you're falling short. And congenial, I think, is the key. You want people who are supportive and on your side.
Yeah, I also wanted to mention that sometimes a book can take a whole different path with feedback. I was working on A Soulless Forever, which is a tiny book about getting comfort about life after death and the soul. And I was just putting together quotes. I was just going to do a little compilation. And two friends of mine who are not Baha'i read the manuscript and they said, this language is so formal, it's hard for me to take it in. Can you make it more narrative? And I went, oh, okay. So I used analogies that Abdu'l-Baha uses about this world and the next world and told a story or two, as well as included some of the sacred text. So that was just so fundamental in helping the book, be absorbable by all kinds of people. In fact, it's been reviewed by very staunch Christians, and they say, well, I may not agree with everything in this book, but it's a great conversation starter, and I loved it. So,
oh, yay!
Yeah.
I had another point, but I forget what it was. Collect your new ideas is a really important thing, but don't get off track. When I'm working on a book, I come up with a million ideas for other books that I would like to start on. And it's very tempting to just put one aside. And it's important, I think, to collect those ideas. I don't know how you do it, Susan, but like I have a list on my phone. I have a little box full of slips of paper. You must have a ton of ideas floating around too.
I get an idea about once a decade, so I don't have that problem.
I doubt that very much. You've had a very prolific decade in the last decade. And then the important part, like I mentioned before about persevering, you might be the next great thing. There's no way to know if you never finish your book. You might be J.K. Rowling or H.M. Baliuzzi. There's no way to know until you finish it and get it out there. Oh, I know what I was going to say before. The other thing that's interesting with the critique group is they've really kept me going. When I felt like exhausted or not sure where to turn in this book, just having somebody say, I can't wait to read your next chapter. I want to know what happens next. Mm-hmm. that can be really helpful. And they're not saying it's perfect. They're not, they're not saying there's nothing to be fixed, but they at least want to read more. And another thing that helps me with a group is I have a meeting coming up. There's always, our next meeting is in 2 weeks. Our next meeting is next month. So I have that accountability of having to have something ready, to share with the group. Something important about inspiration, I guess. I believe heartily in inspiration and that all art comes from God, definitely. But I think you can't just sit back and wait for it to hit you like a lightning strike. One thing that Stephen King says, whether or not you like his work, he is amazingly prolific. He says, don't wait for the muse. Your job is to make sure the muse knows where you're going to be every day from 9 till noon or 7 to 3. If he does know, I assure you that sooner or later he'll start showing up. And that idea of, getting into the habit of just writing somewhere at some time. I've even heard from some people in listening to podcasts who wrote an entire novel on their phone while they were in a taxi or on the bus or waiting in line at the grocery store. It's possible. I mean, it's amazing. Some people can write a novel a month. I've even come across people in podcasts who talk about that, which blows my mind. They are full-time writers, so they're not juggling a day job. But there's nothing, if you really want to do it, there's nothing holding you back, for definitely. And I'm also, I don't know about you, Susan, I'm a big believer in reading these books about writing, but you said you don't really read them. Do you? Is that what you said?
Well, I definitely read Bird by Bird, and I've read The Artist's Way, but I don't make a regular habit of it. There's so much reading out there to be done, And
there is.
Biography, you have a lot of research to do, so.
Oh yeah, that's definitely true. Yeah. If I'm having a slow day or a dry spell or something, I have this whole shelf of books about how to write. I've been collecting them for 30 years probably, and they're inspiring, I think.
Nice.
Yeah. Anything else you want to chat about before we open it up to questions? I think it's almost 3, right?
Yeah. I love your ideas about prompts. That's a very helpful.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So, if you get into the habit of doing that thing of morning pages or free writing or, just sitting down to put something on the paper or on the screen, giving yourself a prompt can be helpful. So things like I remember when, or something I admire in people, or I love the story of, and just, answer the question, finish the sentence. However, whatever comes to mind, I was surprised to learn what, or try to look for one amazing thing every day and write it down.
Nice.
Or if you just have in the back of your mind, I am looking for story ideas everywhere I go today. So like I'm in line at the grocery store, someone has a certain band on their shirt. Oh, I should write about, what it's like to go to your first concert or whatever. If you kind of put those glasses on, sometimes you'll find ideas everywhere you go.
Nice.
Okay, well, we would be happy to take questions if there are any.
Thank you guys so much. Just before we get to the questions, that was awesome. I really liked, not just the points about writing, but also understanding youth and junior youth. And I majored in creative writing, and just takes me back to my creative writing classes.
Oh, yay.
Awesome. We've already got 3 questions and answers, and so we can go ahead and move into our question and answer part. And If you have a question and answer, or if you have a question, please put it in the question and answer part, that little button that you click down at the bottom of your Zoom. That'll be easier for us than if it's in the chat. So we already have 3, and there's one, it just says, I just want to answer it real quick. Will this PowerPoint, is by Peter. Will this PowerPoint be available? Lots of good ideas, but I can't capture them all. Very good question. This talk is being recorded, and it's going to be available on the YouTube channel of the Wilmette Institute. And in the chat, I'm going to put that address right now, and it's for everyone. So it will be available there.
And I would also be happy to share the slides if anybody wants them. There's another slide I forgot to show you that has a list of resources that I use, the podcast that I mentioned, and different books and things.
Cool. We have a question from Anne. What does Brilliant Star need from freelance authors, if anything? Themes or ideas? How might we serve the magazine?
Oh, thank you, Anne. That's a great question. Let's see. We don't get much fiction for Brilliant Star, and that would be super helpful. We're always open to historical fiction. We would love to get more work from youth writing their own stories or articles. Fiction is I know it's tricky for Brilliant Star because, we've got these 32 pages and we were entrusted by the NSA to fill them with the most dynamic content we can. And so we have to be really careful about what we put in them. But Brilliant Star's fiction is usually like about, 800 to 1,000 words. It needs to have virtues, demonstrate virtues in some way without being preachy. That's the key. Oh, thanks, Heidi. Yeah, we do have writer's guidelines on our website also. So that would definitely help. A lot of times we have, we like those folk tales that are kind of an adaptation of a folk tale. It's fun because the plot is already laid out there and you can kind of play with it. Finding folk tales that work for our audience is tricky because a lot of, a folk tale, in order to work, it needs to have, the beginning, middle, end. It needs to have that conflict that gets resolved, the characters having agency. And, it can be tricky to find something that works as a folk tale that's positive, it has a positive message. So folk tales would be great. What we don't publish too much by adults would be like, articles, nonfiction by adults. We don't do that too much, but then I will say we do have also the website, and the website is a little more expansive. Of course, we're not limited by paper and publishing. So there's really no limit to what we can publish on the website. So there might be options for other things that could go on the website. And we have a parents and teachers section on the website. And that is a place where if you're writing for adults, or if you want to write about how adults can be better teachers or better parents or something like that, that can all go in the parents and teachers section. What do you think, Susan?
Oh, yes. I've just been reading through the comments, and I'm so happy that you all are writing the things that you're interested in producing. That's very interesting. And I also want to give props to Aurora. Is that how you say your name, Aurora? For continuing with, let's see, Pupil of the Eye, subjects, biographies, because one of the reasons I'm writing these biographies about African Americans is that there was nobody else that people knew about that are from African American heritage to write them themselves. So this is really exciting for me. And I give you lots of encouragement. If I can help in any way, I'm happy to. Oh, I did it right? Yay! And I'm happy to post my email address if anyone wants to get in touch. So I'll put it in the chat.
I also put the Brilliant Star website in the chat. If it's brilliantstarmagazine.org, someone had that question.
There's another question here from Anne. That is there a place where freelance Baha'i authors / illustrators might connect? Might BPT be able to host such a site? Regarding the BPT part, now I know we've got a Facebook page. I know we've got a YouTube channel. I'm not sure if those are really places that Baha'i authors could connect. And I'm not on social media, so it's hard for me to answer that question. But it's a good question. What I can do is and the email for BPT is bpt@usbnc.org. So I can put that in the question and answer place here.
I think there are some Facebook groups too, if you're on Facebook, for Baha'i artists, where we can kind of share ideas. Brilliant Star has a Brilliant Star Idea Exchange group, which would be open to really anyone who wants to exchange ideas related to kids. I think there's some Facebook groups out there. Oh, Tiffany Sobani says, I have a Facebook group for Baha'i writers, but have not promoted it. What is it, Tiffany? Let us know. That sounds fun.
Yeah, please type it in the chat. Yeah. Have a question here from Sandra. Sandra, the only thing that came through was Susan, comma. So sorry, we don't have the rest of your question. Can you retype it?
I could say anything at all, couldn't I? In answer to that question.
We have another question from Jesse. Is the Muse the same as the hosts of heaven or the spiritual concourse on high?
Wow.
That's an interesting one.
That is an interesting question. What do you think, Susan?
Well, I haven't the slightest idea. All I know is that ideas will come to me that I have no experience with. I mean, they'll just come out of the blue. So what is that? Is that a whispering from the divine concourse? I'd like to hope so. Of course, we get ideas that aren't very divine as well. So it's really hard to tell. But I do pray for that kind of assistance, and I do get ideas that are very workable. So I like to think there's a connection there.
I think so. Yeah, the Muse, I guess, is what they always used to call it. That has some kind of Greek or mythological origin, I think. It could be the Supreme Concourse. I liked what you said, Susan, about talking to the spirits of the people you're writing about. I do that too. I look for help from, the Muses were the 9 daughters of Zeus, all in charge of different arts. Thanks, Anne. So like I think about artists or Baha'is that I've heard of who are in the next world, who have done the things that I'm trying to do. Like, Nabil, for example, was a writer, in the next world. There are tons of authors, artists. Julia Thompson was an artist. Sometimes I just call on whoever's out there, or even my old friend Terry Cassidy from the Baha'i Publishing Trust. She's in the next world now.
Nice.
And I think that inspiration can come anytime. So I understand why you're that one person I can understand how he was able to write the novel on his phone, because that when it comes, that's sometimes what's needed. We have to get our phone out and got to get this down.
Yeah.
Sandra got back to her. She said she just wanted to get in touch with you, Susan, and she said thank you for putting your email in the chat.
Yay.
Right now, the question and answer is blank.
All right.
Anybody have any more? Oh, here we go. I'm writing this is from Mitra. I'm writing a young adult fiction book. I think it is an uplifting story with a good message, but one of the characters uses some mild profanity. It is part of her character and how I imagined her. I feel a little torn writing her that way because as a Baha'i, I try to avoid profanity, but I also want her character to be realistic. Any advice, thoughts?
That is a good question. I have used a little light profanity, I guess, in my work. I guess it depends which kind of profanity. There are some that's a little bluer than others. I know what you mean about it being realistic, and that is the way a lot of people talk nowadays. And sometimes, you can just put in a little bit because I don't know. I think in real life, some people, that's every other word is profanity. And that would get really tedious to read. But if you just sprinkle in a little bit, I think that it kind of gets the idea across. This is how this person talks. I don't know if there would be a problem with the publishing trust publishing something with some profanity in it. I don't know. But if that's the way you feel inspired to write that character and it just feels right to you, I would go with my gut. And the other thing is, if you're writing for kids or young adults, we know it will not be new to them. They hear it all the time on the bus, at school, in their music. Do you have any thoughts, Susan?
Well, the only reason I would use profanity in the biographies is if it's a direct quote.
Mm-hmm.
And that does happen.
Oh, totally.
I don't think there are any in these books, but I mean, the arts, the music business is not exactly devoid of the use of profanity. That's a very interesting question. I've only written, books about the faith or these biographies, so I haven't let loose that sea to see where it might go.
Another thing you could, if you're not sure about the profanity, and of course, if you are, that's fine. Another thing would be to introduce that kind of attitude in a different way, like in different kinds of words that they choose, or turns of phrase that aren't profanity but are maybe like casual or slangy, or that might be an option. But I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but some Baha'i writers definitely do not think it's appropriate, as I see in the chat. But trust your gut.
The next, got two questions here from Aurora, and they're kind of the same. Got three here. Are there plans to hold more writers' workshops, seminars? Perhaps the next would have junior youth and youth that could serve on the panel and share what they think about what they would like to see, and also discussing writing for junior youth and youth of color. In terms of like the publishing trust, yes, we are planning on holding more workshops and seminars. Definitely. I don't know if she's really addressing the publishing trust or the writers here, but just for the publishing trust, yes, we are. And those are good suggestions, and same advice that I gave to Anne. Those would be good things to email us about. And the email again is bpt@usbnc.org.
There is a young writers group that's run by Nasim Mansouri, they had like a workshop around the time of the fast, and I think they do one in the summer too. I think it's called the Young Writers Initiative, but I'm not sure. I can find out. You know, and there are young writers who are involved with her there. So that would be a place to find young writers. And the other person is Jessica Kerr, who does works with youth for the Wilmette Institute. She does the program called Transformative Leadership. She has kids all over the world. So that would be, I know a lot of them are involved in the arts too. So I think hearing from youth would be terrific.
Absolutely.
Like you were saying, Susan, you're writing these books about people from other cultures because, you know, as far as we know, there aren't other people writing them. And your point about having people from those cultures read what you're writing is really important. A lot of writers talk, I mean, there is the wisdom, or there is the idea that only people of a certain culture should write about that culture. But if that happens, then, you know, white people need to be able to put people of all different backgrounds in their works so that it reflects the real world, which has a lot of diversity. So, you know, if we just write about people of our own background, it's very limiting. But having, I've heard people call it a sensitivity reader. And that can be if you're writing about any kind of culture. It could be, you know, people of a lower economic station, people with a certain disability, you know, any kind of difference or something that's not reflective of your experience, someone else could give you feedback about it. That's really helpful.
Let's see, we don't have any more questions in the question and answer box, so please feel free to post anything you want answered. 3:17, this might be a good time. We do have something to ask everybody to fill out for us, and that's a poll. And the poll right here, you'll see that it's brought up onto the screen. Starts by asking, they're basically two questions. And of course, these questions are designed to help us make these webinars the best that they can be. So the first one is Junior Youth Books. It says, what brought you to the webinar to get today? Multiple choice. And number two, would you be interested in the following? And then multiple choice. And if you could do that, that would, as we approach the end, like the last 10 minutes here, that would be a big help for us. And of course, at the same time, please feel free to ask more questions here. We've got, you know, two writers who have a wealth of experience and a lot of knowledge, and this is really a great opportunity.
I would be interested in knowing, yeah, what other people are doing, you know, what your topics are, what your interests are. Anne had asked if I could put up my list of resources, and I would be happy to do that. It's in my little PowerPoint. Here are some resources that I use, and like I'm kind of addicted to these books. So yeah, The Magic Words, Bird by Bird. There's one called Nonfiction Writers Dig Deep that I just came across. It's down here. And this is 50 award-winning children's book authors share the secret of engaging writing. And a lot of this is about, well, it is all about nonfiction. So, you know, there isn't a whole lot about nonfiction, writing for nonfiction, I don't think. Somebody, one of the writers that I talked to, or that I read, sorry, I'd like to talk to her. She talked about how there's, you know, this impression that nonfiction isn't creative, that like, I think what she said is any robot could write it. And that's just not, oh, here it is. There's a common crushing misconception that fiction is creative writing drawn from the depth of the writer's soul, while nonfiction is simply a recitation of facts that basically any robot could spit out. This is someone from this book. The reality is very different. My personality, my beliefs, and my experiences are deeply embedded in the books I write. And I know a lot of the term creative nonfiction is used a lot too today. And definitely a lot of creativity goes into it. So I know, Susan, I know you put a lot of creativity into your nonfiction.
Well, I sure look for the best stories I can. And that's another thing that we can encourage junior youth and youth to do is interview people.
Mm-hmm.
People in their community, interview their friends, because biography is built on stories about people. And it helps junior youth connect emotionally and even spiritually with adults and their peers. So I really heartily recommend, if you have a junior youth group or want to inspire junior youth, to help get them started interviewing others. It's a wonderful way to grow and see the world with new eyes. I think as a teenager, I always thought I had all the answers. And if I'd interviewed a few more people, I would have been a wiser young woman. But anyway, it's exciting. I wish I could interview so many people. Right now, I can only write up about people that have died, but I would love to talk to a lot of people that aren't dead yet, so that biographies can be written.
I challenge the fact that you can only write about people who are dead. Says who?
Oh, well, we can talk about that later.
Okay. And when you're doing research, when I did research for Voyage of Love, or when I'm doing research for Brilliant Star, I wish that people had interviewed other people more often, so that we would have their actual words.
Yeah.
So yeah, like interview the ordinary people in your community, because you never know when someone will be writing about them.
It's great for archives. It's just great all the way around.
True. We have a couple of activities on the Brilliant Star website that are sort of encouraging kids to interview those people around them about racism or about service or about just about anything. So there's some resources for how to interview that are helpful.
Nice.
I mentioned some podcasts that I enjoy on here. Like there's one called Right Minded, Next Level Authors, Helping Writers Become Authors. And of course, Baha'i Blogcast. I know Anne Perry was on there recently with your husband. He does amazing interviews, that Rainn Wilson. There are a couple of books I really enjoy by Joanna Penn, Productivity for Authors and The Successful Author Mindset. I found very helpful. I listened to those as audiobooks. And the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators is an organization that you can join, but that also puts out a lot of resources that are really helpful.
Nice. I love all the things coming up in the chat.
Yeah, there's a question in the chat that I saw a little bit earlier. It was from Shaheen. It was how, I'm looking for it right now because I lost it with the chat, but here it is. How do I best engage the various publishers as a Baha'i author? Well, of course, if you want to submit, if you have a manuscript, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, and you want to submit it to the Publishing Trust, Baha'i Publishing Trust, you can submit it to acquisitions@usbnc.org, and I will put that down here. This is our email. There it is right there, acquisitions@usbnc.org for BPT. And of course, there are other Baha'i publishers. George Ronald is another one that you can look up. You can Google their email addresses. But that's the best way, I think, is if you have something, or if you have ideas and you're thinking of something, the best way is to just email us. Email the Baha'i publisher with your thoughts, with your ideas, or your manuscript if you've already finished it.
Definitely. I know out in the real world, or not real world, in the secular world, they talk about getting an agent is kind of often the path toward getting published, and going to conventions. A lot, there are tons of conferences being held for writers of all types all over the world. And then Baha'i conferences too are also a great way to get in touch with people who are writers or editors or publishers.
Let's see. Oh, somebody said, oh, they didn't see it. Maybe I had it. Maybe I didn't have it to. Maybe I didn't have that email to everyone. So I'm gonna do it again. acquisitions@usbnc.org. And that should go out to everyone. Thank you, Mary and Rich, for saying that.
Oh, hi, Mary and Rich.
We have a question from Deborah. Deborah here. I'd like to give a shout out to Book Passage in Corte Madera, California, north of San Francisco. They are pre-pandemic, hosted incredible conferences and classes regarding writing children's literature, historical nonfiction, many topics close to this conversation. Thank you, Deborah.
That is wonderful.
Book Passage in Corte Madera, California.
If you missed it, I noticed that Kim put a note in here that she collects writing prompts and is happy to share her writing prompts with anybody. I'm just copying her message. This is not from me, it's from Kim. That she collects writing prompts, and if anyone wants a list of ideas, you can reach her at natstoeagles@yahoo.com. So, okay, here are some poll results. That's interesting. I'm interested in writing books for junior youth, illustrating. I have written books for junior youth. Excellent. Yeah, I mean, junior youth is such an important time when they're passionate about things and they really need those resources. And I know that there are so many talented people doing this kind of work who have a lot to say. So I would love to hear more from future programs that the Publishing Trust puts on.
Me too.
Me too.
Well,
Mary and Rich Chamberlain are in the chat, and I know they have written for Brilliant Star, and they've also published their own picture books that are really wonderful. And Mary and Rich were writing about African culture, and they are not of African descent, I don't believe. So that happens. Oh, here's their website. Thanks, Anne.
got another just comment from Deborah regarding the last mention, the last question she mentioned. P.S. A lot of writers, including Annie Lamott, live here and just drop in to share. You're welcome to come. Thank you.
Where's that?
Well, that's that was at the what was it, the last thing that she mentioned, which was what was it? Here it is. Book Passage in Corte Madera, California.
Oh, lovely.
North of San Francisco.
Yeah, I would love to.
Let's go, Amy.
Okay. Yeah. If you, there are also like specialty organizations if you write different types of books. For example, there is a mystery writers group called Sisters in Crime, which has male members also. And they have chapters all over the world. That's where I found my mystery writing work, or my mystery writing group. And yeah, I mean, that's really helpful.
It looks like we have time. It's 3:29. Looks like we have time for one more question. This is from Shaheen. Will the Publishing Trust accept a manuscript that is Baha'i inspired and not necessarily Baha'i work? I think the best way to answer that is we just have to see it. And by like Baha'i, like as a general rule, we publish, for example, if it doesn't necessarily have to be like a biography of Hand of the Cause or something like that, if that's what's being referred to as in being a Baha'i work. If it's like Baha'i inspired and it talks about the principles of the faith, and the principles of the faith figure into the writing, whether it's nonfiction or fiction, then the answer to that is yes, we would. We would be open to accepting it, but of course, we would just have to read it and evaluate it to see if it's something that fits our publishing agenda. So I hope that helps.
Not too long ago, you published a mystery novel, right?
That's right.
For youth.
Yeah, that's right.
And I don't know how much Baha'i content that had. I think it didn't seem like it was really Baha'i focused.
Yeah, that's right. And it wasn't. That was one that that was a while ago. That the title escapes me right now, but I remember that this was a detective. There's a hate crime that happened. The detective is Baha'i, and he has to use the Baha'i principles of consultation and of nonviolence to solve the case. And yeah, it's a great it's a great book for youth and junior youth. It's really awesome, and you can find it on BahaiBookstore.com. Yeah, that name escapes me, but you can.
Was it by Alan Manifold?
Yes, by Alan Manifold. Maybe we can Google that real quick. I know that we're out of time here, but I do want to it's such a good example of writing for junior youth and how, yes, Consulting Detective. Yes.
Oh, that's right.
Consulting Detective is the name of it. So if you want to see what to me is a good book that embodies those principles, Consulting Detective by Alan Manifold.
I just wanted to say real quick in answer to Tiffany that most of the kids who filled out the survey for us for this program listed sci-fi and fantasy as their favorite genre. So it's going strong out there among the young people.
It is. And I know science fiction is a big love of a lot of people too, and it kind of overlaps to some extent. We have a science fiction writer on the staff of Brilliant Star who will be publishing her novels soon, Donna Price. Watch for those.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone so much. I think we've reached the end here, so just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Amy. It was awesome. I learned a lot, and thank you as always to the Wilmette Institute.
Thank you everyone who came and talked with us. It was great to chat about writing. I never get tired of it. And thanks, Chris, and thanks to the Publishing Trust for inviting us.
Oh, sure. You're always welcome.